The barn door creaked open, and Sophia Winters held her breath, pressing herself against the rough wooden wall as if she could melt into it and disappear entirely. It was 1877, and Independence, Missouri had been her home for 3 years now, though she still felt like a ghost passing through its dusty streets. At 22 years old, Sophia had perfected the art of being overlooked. She kept her head down, her brown hair pulled back in a severe bun, her dresses the color of dirt and shadow. Her father's death 5 years ago had left her and her mother with nothing but debts, and when consumption took her mother 2 winters past, Sophia found herself completely alone in the world. She worked now at the Thompson Ranch, mucking stalls and mending fences, doing work most women would not touch. The other ranch hands ignored her, the townspeople forgot her name, and that was exactly how she believed it should be. But today, everything would change, though she did not know it yet. The barn door opened wider, and boots scuffed against the dirt floor. Sophia squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to become smaller, invisible. She had been hiding here during her lunch break, stealing a few moments with a battered book she had found in the ranch house attic. Reading was her only escape, her only luxury, and she guarded these stolen minutes fiercely. "You can come out," a voice said, deep and gentle. "I am not here to bother you." Sophia's eyes flew open. She knew that voice, though she had never heard it directed at her before. Xavier Pierce had arrived at the Thompson Ranch 6 months ago, a cowboy from Texas with a reputation for being the best horse trainer in 3 states. He was 26, tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of summer sky. Every unmarried woman in Independence had tried to catch his attention, but he remained politely distant from them all. She had watched him work with the horses, marveling at his patience and skill. She had seen him defend a young ranch hand from the foreman's unfair criticism. She had noticed the way he always thanked the cook and helped carry supplies without being asked, but she had never imagined he knew she existed. "I said you can come out," Xavier repeated, and now she could hear amusement in his tone. "I saw you slip in here with your book." "I promise I will not tell Thompson you are taking a break." Slowly, Sophia emerged from behind the hay bales, clutching her book to her chest like a shield. She could not meet his eyes. "I am sorry. I will get back to work." "It is your lunch time," Xavier said. "You are allowed to rest." He paused, and she felt his gaze on her face, steady and warm. "What are you reading?" The question surprised her so much that she looked up. Xavier stood near the door, one hand resting on the frame, his expression genuinely curious. No one had asked her about her reading in years. No one had asked her about anything. "It is just an old novel," she said quietly. "I found it in the attic. It is about a woman who travels west to start a new life. Do you like it?" "Yes." The word came out barely above a whisper. Xavier smiled, and it transformed his face, making him seem younger and more approachable. "I like reading too. Not many folks out here care much for books, but I think stories are important. They remind us there are other ways to live, other places to see." Sophia did not know what to say. She stood frozen, waiting for him to laugh or dismiss her or reveal that this was some kind of joke. But he just kept looking at her with those steady blue eyes, as if she was worth looking at, as if she was someone who mattered. "I should go," she finally managed. "The fence in the north pasture needs mending." "That fence can wait," Xavier said. "Eat your lunch, rest. You work harder than half the men here." He tipped his hat to her and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "My name is Xavier, by the way, Xavier Pierce. Though I suppose you probably already knew that." "Sophia," she said, her voice so soft she thought he might not hear. "Sophia Winters. Sophia." He said her name like it was worth remembering, like it was something precious. That is a beautiful name. I will see you around, Sophia Winters. Then he was gone, leaving her standing in the barn with her heart pounding and her hands shaking. She sank down onto a hay bale, the book forgotten in her lap. No one looked at her the way Xavier Pierce just had. No one spoke to her like her thoughts and interests mattered. It had to be a fluke, a moment of kindness that would not be repeated. Men like Xavier did not notice women like her. But the next day, when she was hauling water to the horses, Xavier appeared at her side and took the heavy buckets from her hands without a word. He carried them to the trough, filled it, and then turned to her with that same gentle smile. "You do not have to help me," Sophia said, flustered. "I can manage." "I know you can," Xavier replied, "but that does not mean you should have to do it alone." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Xavier would find her during her breaks, always respectful, always kind. He would talk to her about books and horses, about the weather and the changing seasons. He asked her questions about her life, and when she answered in her quiet, hesitant way, he listened as if every word mattered. He never touched her without permission, never crowded her space, but his presence became the brightest part of her days. Sophia began to notice things she had been too afraid to see before. The way Xavier's eyes would seek her out across the ranch yard. The way he always seemed to be nearby when the work was hardest. The way he looked at her, really looked at her, as if she was not invisible at all but rather the only person in the world worth seeing. One evening in late September, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sophia finished her work and walked toward the small cabin she rented at the edge of town. She was exhausted, her muscles aching from a long day of labor, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Xavier had spent the afternoon teaching her about the horses, showing her how to read their moods and movements. His hand had brushed hers once, briefly, and the touch had sent electricity racing through her body. She was so lost in her thoughts that she did not hear the footsteps behind her until a rough hand grabbed her arm. "Well, look what we have here," a voice slurred. Sophia's stomach dropped. It was Jed Miller, one of the ranch hands, and he reeked of whiskey. "Little mouse, all alone." Sophia tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Let me go." "Why you always so unfriendly?" Jed leaned closer, and Sophia turned her face away from his breath. "You think you are too good for us. Just because Xavier Pierce has been sniffing around you," fear flooded through her. "Please, I just want to go home." "Maybe I will walk you," Jed said, his tone ugly. "Maybe we can get to know each other better." The lady said, "Let her go." Xavier's voice cut through the gathering darkness like a blade. Sophia had never heard him sound like that, cold and dangerous. Jed dropped her arm and spun around. "Pierce, this is not your business. I am making it my business." Xavier stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard. "Go back to the bunkhouse, Jed. Sleep off the whiskey." "Or what?" Jed puffed up his chest, swaying slightly. "Or I will make you regret it." There was no bluster in Xavier's voice, just simple fact. For a moment, Sophia thought Jed would refuse. But something in Xavier's expression made him think better of it. He spat on the ground and stumbled away, muttering curses under his breath. Xavier waited until Jed disappeared from view, then turned to Sophia. The hardness melted from his face, replaced by concern. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I am fine," Sophia said, though her voice shook. "Thank you." "Come on," Xavier said gently. "Let me walk you home." "I will not have you going alone with Jed out here drunk." They walked in silence for a while, the evening air cool against Sophia's flushed cheeks. Her arm still tingled where Jed had grabbed her, but more than that, she was aware of Xavier's presence beside her, solid and protective. "I am sorry that happened," Xavier said finally. "Jed is a fool when he drinks. I will talk to Thompson about it tomorrow." "Please do not," Sophia said quickly. I cannot afford to lose this job. If there is trouble, Thompson might decide I am not worth the hassle. Xavier stopped walking and turned to face her. They were standing beneath an oak tree, and the last rays of sunlight filtered through the leaves, painting everything in shades of amber. Sophia, you are worth 100 men like Jed. You are worth more than mucking stalls and mending fences, though you do that work better than anyone. Do you know that? She could not answer. Tears pricked at her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. She had spent so long believing herself worthless, invisible, easy to discard. Hearing Xavier say otherwise felt like a hand reaching into dark water to pull her toward the surface. I do not understand, she whispered. Why are you kind to me? Why do you even notice me? Xavier reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips barely grazed her cheek, but the touch sent warmth flooding through her entire body. How could I not notice you? He said softly. You are the first thing I look for in the morning and the last thing I think about at night. You are strong and smart and brave, and when you smile, which is not often enough, it is like watching the sun come up. Sophia, you think you are invisible, but to me, you are the only star in the sky. Her breath caught. She stared up at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or mockery, but found only sincerity and something deeper, something that made her heart race. I am no one, she said, but the words lacked conviction. I have nothing. I am just a hired hand who sleeps in a rented cabin and owns 3 dresses. You are Sophia Winters, Xavier said, and the way he spoke her name made it sound like music. And I have been trying to work up the courage to tell you how I feel for weeks now. I know I am just a cowboy. I do not have much to offer either. But I am a good worker and I save my wages and I dream of having my own ranch someday. And lately, when I picture that future, you are in it. You are in every part of it. Sophia felt like she was dreaming. This could not be real. Men like Xavier Pierce did not fall in love with women like her. But the emotion in his eyes was undeniable, raw and real and terrifying in its intensity. I do not know what to say, she whispered. You do not have to say anything right now, Xavier told her. I just needed you to know. I needed you to understand that you are not invisible, not to me. You never were. They stood there beneath the oak tree as darkness gathered around them, and for the first time in years, Sophia felt seen. Truly, completely seen, and it was terrifying and wonderful all at once. Finally, Xavier stepped back and offered her his arm. Come on, let me get you home safe. Sophia took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her hand. They walked the rest of the way to her cabin in comfortable silence, and when they reached her door, Xavier tipped his hat to her. Good night, Sophia Winters. Good night, Xavier Pierce. She watched him walk away into the darkness, his tall figure gradually disappearing from view. Then she went inside, closed the door, and leaned against it, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. That night, Sophia lay in her narrow bed and replayed every word Xavier had spoken. She thought about the way he looked at her, the gentleness in his touch, the sincerity in his voice. She had spent so long making herself small, believing that invisibility was safety. But Xavier made her want to be seen. He made her want to take up space in the world, to matter, to be someone worth loving. The next morning, Sophia woke with a new sense of purpose. She braided her hair but left it softer around her face. She wore her best dress, which was still plain but clean and well mended. When she arrived at the ranch, she held her head a little higher. Xavier was in the corral, working with a young stallion that had been giving everyone trouble. The horse was nervous and aggressive, shying away from anyone who approached. But Xavier moved with patient confidence, never forcing, always waiting for the horse to come to him. Sophia climbed up on the corral fence to watch, something she would never have dared before. Xavier glanced over and saw her, and his face lit up with such genuine pleasure that Sophia felt her cheeks warm. "Good morning," he called. "Good morning," she replied, and was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Xavier worked for another hour, gradually earning the stallion's trust. When he finally got a halter on the horse and led it calmly around the corral, the other ranch hands who had gathered to watch broke into applause. But Xavier only had eyes for Sophia. He walked over to where she sat on the fence, the stallion following docilely behind him. "What did you think?" he asked. "I think you have a gift," Sophia said honestly. "I have never seen anyone handle horses the way you do." "It is just patience," Xavier said, "and understanding that every creature wants to be treated with respect. Some folks, they think you have to break a horse's spirit to make it useful, but I believe you can earn its trust instead, and that makes for a better partnership." Sophia thought about his words. She thought about how Xavier had never tried to break her spirit or force her into anything. He had simply been kind and patient, earning her trust just as he earned the trust of the horses. "Xavier," she said softly, aware of the other ranch hands nearby, "about what you said last night." He went still, his blue eyes fixed on her face. "Yes, I need time," she said carefully. "I am not used to being noticed. I am not used to mattering to anyone, but I want to try. I want to know you better. I want to see where this could go." The smile that broke across Xavier's face was like sunrise. "Take all the time you need, Sophia. I am not going anywhere." Over the following weeks, they built something fragile and precious between them. Xavier courted her in quiet ways, respecting her need to move slowly. He would bring her wildflowers he found on the range. He shared his lunch with her, and they would sit in the barn talking about everything and nothing. He taught her to ride better, his hands steadying her when she felt unbalanced, his voice encouraging her when she doubted herself. Sophia began to blossom under his attention. She smiled more, laughed more. The other people on the ranch noticed the change in her, and while some of the women in town whispered jealously about how she had caught Xavier Pierce's eye, most folks seemed genuinely happy for them both. One Saturday evening in October, Xavier asked if he could take her to the town dance. Sophia's first instinct was to refuse. She did not know how to dance, had never been to a social event where she was meant to be seen and noticed, but the hope in Xavier's eyes made her brave. "Yes," she said. "I would like that." She spent the week in a state of nervous anticipation. She had no proper dress for a dance, but Mrs. Henderson, the seamstress in town who had always been kind to her, offered to help. When Sophia hesitated, worried about the cost, Mrs. Henderson waved her off. "Consider it a gift, dear," the older woman said warmly. "Xavier Pierce is a good man, and you deserve to feel beautiful for him." The dress Mrs. Henderson created was the loveliest thing Sophia had ever owned. It was deep blue, the color of the sky at twilight, with simple but elegant lines that suited her figure. When she put it on the night of the dance, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. Xavier arrived to collect her just as the sun was setting. When she opened the door, he froze, his eyes widening. "Sophia," he breathed, "you look beautiful. You always look beautiful, but tonight, you are breathtaking." "Thank you," she said, blushing. "You look very handsome as well." He did. He wore a clean white shirt and a dark jacket, his hair neatly combed, his boots polished. But more than his appearance, it was the way he looked at her that made Sophia feel beautiful. As if she was the only woman in the world. As if she was the only star in his sky. The dance was held in the church hall, which had been decorated with lanterns and autumn flowers. When they arrived, people turned to look, and Sophia fought the urge to shrink away. But Xavier kept her hand firmly tucked in his arm, radiating pride and confidence. "I should warn you," Sophia whispered as they entered the hall. "I do not really know how to dance." "Then I will teach you," Xavier said simply. "Just like with the horses, trust me and I will guide you." The fiddle music started and Xavier led her onto the floor. He was true to his word, guiding her through the steps with patience and skill. At first, Sophia was stiff and anxious, hyper-aware of everyone watching. But Xavier kept his eyes on her face, murmuring encouragement, and gradually she relaxed into the rhythm of the music. "There you are," Xavier said softly as she began to follow his lead more naturally. "You are doing perfectly." They danced 3 songs in a row, and by the end, Sophia was laughing, breathless, and happy. Other couples had joined them on the floor, and no one was watching them anymore, but it did not matter. Xavier still looked at her as if she was the only person in the room. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for fresh air. The night was cool and clear, and stars glittered overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Xavier led her to a quiet spot near the church garden, away from the noise and light of the hall. "Are you having a good time?" he asked. "The best time," Sophia said honestly. "I never thought I could feel like this, so light and free and happy." "You deserve to feel that way every day," Xavier said. He reached for her hands and she let him take them. "Sophia, I know we have only been courting for a short time, but I need you to know how serious I am about you. This is not a passing fancy for me. You are not someone I am spending time with to fill the days." "What am I then?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "You are everything," Xavier said simply. "You are the future I want to build. You are the reason I work so hard and save every penny. I want to buy land, Sophia. I want to build a ranch where we can raise horses and have a life together. I want to marry you if you will have me. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday soon, when you are ready." Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks. She had dreamed of being loved like this, but had never believed it could really happen. "I am ready now," she whispered. "I have been invisible for so long, Xavier. I have been alone and forgotten and worthless. But when you look at me, I feel real. I feel like I matter. I love you. I think I have loved you since that first day in the barn when you asked me about my book." Xavier made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. "I love you too, Sophia Winters. I love you so much it terrifies me." They stood there in the church garden, holding each other beneath the stars, and Sophia felt something shift inside her. She was not invisible anymore. She was loved, cherished, seen. She was Xavier Pierce's star, and he was hers. Xavier pulled back slightly and cupped her face in his hands. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," she breathed. He kissed her softly at first, gentle and reverent, as if she was something precious. Then deeper, with more urgency, and Sophia kissed him back with all the longing and love that had been building in her heart for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not someday. Soon. Let me take care of you, Sophia. Let me love you the way you deserve." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They returned to the dance long enough to share the news with the gathered townspeople. Mrs. Henderson cried and hugged Sophia tightly. Mr. Thompson, the ranch owner, shook Xavier's hand and offered them a wedding gift. Even some of the women who had gossiped about Sophia seemed genuinely pleased. Over the next month, Xavier and Sophia made their plans. They would marry in November, a simple ceremony in the Independence Church. Xavier had been saving his wages for years, and he had enough to make a down payment on a small piece of land west of town. It was not much, just 80 acres with a creek running through it, but it was theirs. Xavier planned to build a house and start breeding horses. Sophia would finally have a real home. The wedding day arrived cold and bright, with frost glittering on the ground like scattered crystals. Sophia wore a new dress that Mrs. Henderson had insisted on making as a wedding gift, white with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Xavier wore his best suit, and when he saw Sophia walking down the aisle of the little church, his eyes filled with tears. They spoke their vows before God and the gathered community, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed Sophia with such tender passion that several women in the congregation sighed. That night, Xavier carried Sophia over the threshold of the small cabin they would live in until their house was built. It was humble, just 2 rooms, but it was warm and clean, and it was theirs. Xavier set her down gently and took her hands. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Sophia replied. "I have a husband who loves me, a home, a future. It feels like a dream." "It is real," Xavier promised. "This is real, and it is only the beginning." They made love that night for the first time, tenderly and with growing passion. Xavier was patient and gentle, making sure Sophia felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Sophia rested her head on Xavier's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I was so invisible for so long," she murmured sleepily. "Sometimes I am afraid I will wake up and discover this was all just a beautiful dream." Xavier's arms tightened around her. "You were never invisible, Sophia. Maybe other people failed to see you, but you were always there, always real, always valuable. I am just grateful I had the eyes to recognize what a treasure you are." Winter came to independence, blanketing the land in snow. Xavier and Sophia settled into married life, working side by side on their property. Xavier broke ground for the house despite the cold, determined to have their home built by spring. Sophia helped where she could, and in the evenings, they would sit by the fire in their cabin, planning and dreaming together. Sophia discovered she had a talent for working with numbers, and she began keeping careful records of their finances and making plans for the ranch. Xavier treated her as a full partner in all decisions, valuing her input and intelligence. She had never felt so capable, so useful, so essential. In January, Sophia realized she was pregnant. She was nervous to tell Xavier, unsure how he would react to the news. They had hoped to have children eventually, but they had planned to wait until their situation was more stable. However, when she finally told him one evening after supper, Xavier's face transformed with joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly. He knelt in front of where she sat and placed his hands gently on her belly. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Sophia asked. "I know the timing is not ideal." "The timing is perfect," Xavier said firmly. "Everything with you is perfect. We will make it work, Sophia, we always do." True to his word, Xavier worked even harder to finish the house. By the time spring arrived and the snow melted, he had built a solid home with 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a parlor, and even a front porch where Sophia could sit and watch the sun set. It was not grand, but it was sturdy and warm and beautiful in its simplicity. They moved in on a bright April day, and Sophia walked from room to room, tears streaming down her face. She had a home. A real home built with love by the man who cherished her. She was not invisible anymore. She was a wife, soon to be a mother, a partner in a growing ranch. She was loved and valued and seen. In late August, with the summer heat heavy in the air, Sophia went into labor. Xavier rode into town to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, then paced outside the bedroom door for 12 hours while Sophia labored. When the first cry of a baby split the air, Xavier burst into the room despite Mrs. Patterson's protests. Sophia lay exhausted in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, but she was smiling. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced baby with a tuft of dark hair. "It is a boy," she said softly. "We have a son, Xavier." Xavier approached the bed slowly, almost reverently. He sat beside Sophia and looked down at the baby in wonder. "He is perfect," he breathed. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel, after Xavier's father, and he was the light of their lives. Xavier proved to be a devoted father, taking Samuel with him everywhere once the baby was old enough, teaching him about horses and the land. Sophia watched her husband and son together and felt her heart might burst with happiness. The ranch grew steadily over the next few years. Xavier's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and people came from surrounding counties to buy his animals or have him train theirs. Sophia managed the business side, proving herself to be shrewd and capable. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and happy. When Samuel was 3 years old, Sophia gave birth to twin daughters whom they named Rose and Lily. The house rang with laughter and noise and life. Xavier built additions to accommodate their growing family, and Sophia cultivated a garden that provided vegetables for their table and flowers for her home. The people of Independence who had once overlooked Sophia now treated her with respect and admiration. She and Xavier hosted barn dances and helped neighbors in need. They became pillars of the community, known for their kindness and generosity. But more than all of that, they loved each other. Every day, Xavier still looked at Sophia as if she was the only star in his sky. He would kiss her forehead in the morning before heading out to work. He would take her hand at the dinner table and squeeze it gently. He would hold her at night and whisper his love against her hair. And Sophia, who had once believed herself invisible and worthless, bloomed under his love. She became confident and strong, quick to smile and laugh. She learned to take up space in the world, to believe in her own value. But she never forgot those lonely years, and she made sure to notice the people others overlooked, to offer kindness to those who felt invisible. One evening in late autumn, when Samuel was 8 and the twins were 5, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. The children chased lightning bugs in the yard while Xavier and Sophia sat close together on the porch swing. "You remember that day in the barn?" Xavier asked suddenly. "When I first talked to you, of course," Sophia said. "I was so terrified, I thought you were going to tell me to get back to work." "I almost did not approach you," Xavier admitted. "I had been watching you for weeks, trying to work up the courage. You seemed so self-contained, so distant. But then I saw you with that book, and you looked so peaceful and content, and I thought maybe, just maybe, you might want someone to talk to." "I am so glad you did," Sophia said softly. "You changed my entire life, Xavier. You made me visible. You made me believe I was worth loving." Xavier turned to face her, his expression serious. "You were always worth loving, Sophia, always. I just had the privilege of being the one to show you that." Sophia kissed him gently. After more than 10 years of marriage, his kisses still made her heart race. "I love you," she said. "I will love you until the stars burn out." "I will love you longer than that," Xavier replied with a smile. Over the years that followed, their family continued to grow and thrive. Samuel grew into a fine young man who shared his father's gift with horses. The twins were inseparable and filled the house with music and laughter. When Sophia was 35, she gave birth to one more child, another boy they named Thomas, who became the baby of the family and was thoroughly spoiled by his older siblings. Xavier and Sophia grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated good years and struggled through hard ones. They buried friends and welcomed grandchildren. They built a life that was rich in love and meaning, if not always easy. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Xavier gave Sophia a gift. It was a small leather journal, and on the first page he had written, "For Sophia, who was never invisible, who was always a star." Sophia opened the journal to find that Xavier had filled it with entries over the years, little notes and observations and declarations of love. There were sketches he had made of her, memories of special moments and dreams for their future. It was a chronicle of their life together, seen through his eyes. Tears streamed down Sophia's face as she read. "Xavier, this is beautiful. This is the most precious thing anyone has ever given me." "You gave me more," Xavier said, taking her hands. "You gave me a life worth living. You gave me purpose and joy and a love so deep it still takes my breath away. You were my star 30 years ago, Sophia, and you are my star today. You will be my star until the day I die and beyond." They held each other close, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting out of patience and kindness and love. Sophia thought about the young woman she had been, so convinced of her own invisibility, so certain she would always be alone. She thought about the cowboy who had looked at her as if she was the only thing worth seeing and had never stopped looking at her that way. "Thank you," she whispered against Xavier's chest. "Thank you for seeing me." "Thank you for letting me," Xavier replied. "Thank you for being brave enough to be seen." The years continued to pass, as they always do. Samuel married a kind young woman named Emma and took over much of the daily running of the ranch. Rose became a teacher in Independence, while Lily married a banker and moved to Kansas City, but visited often. Young Thomas showed signs of becoming a veterinarian, fascinated by animal care and healing. Xavier and Sophia grew old together, their hair turning silver, their steps slowing. But their love remained constant, a steady flame that warmed everyone around them. They were known throughout the county as an example of what marriage should be, of what devotion looked like. On a spring evening when Sophia was 58 and Xavier was 62, they sat together on their porch as they had countless times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Their grandchildren played in the yard under Samuel's watchful eye. Xavier had been feeling poorly lately, and Sophia worried about him constantly. But tonight, he seemed peaceful and content. He held her hand and watched the sunset with a small smile on his face. "It has been a good life," he said quietly. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "The best life," Sophia agreed, squeezing his hand. "And it is not over yet. We have many more years ahead of us." Xavier turned to look at her, and his eyes held that same expression she had seen 30 years ago in the barn, that look that said she was his whole world. "I will love you forever, Sophia Winters Pierce, in this life and whatever comes after." "I will love you forever too," she whispered. They sat together as darkness fell and the stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. Sophia rested her head on Xavier's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of his body next to hers. She thought about all the years they had shared, all the joys and sorrows, all the ordinary moments that had woven together to create an extraordinary life. She had thought she would always be invisible, but Xavier had looked at her like she was the only star, and in doing so, he had changed everything. He had given her a life filled with love and purpose and belonging. He had given her a family and a home and the precious knowledge that she mattered, that she was seen, that she was loved beyond measure. Xavier's health did decline over the next year, and Sophia cared for him with the same devotion he had always shown her. When he grew too weak to work, she would sit beside his bed and read to him from the books they had collected over the years. She would tell him stories about their grandchildren and remind him of their favorite memories. And every day, without fail, Xavier would look at her with those blue eyes and say, "You are still my star, Sophia. You will always be my star." When Xavier finally passed, peacefully in his sleep on a cold winter night, Sophia felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. But she was surrounded by love, by the children and grandchildren she and Xavier had created together, and they helped her through the darkest days. Sophia lived on for another 15 years, staying in the house Xavier had built, running the ranch with Samuel's help. She was beloved by her family and respected throughout the community. She never remarried, never even considered it. Xavier had been her one true love, and she was content to live with his memory. She filled her days with purpose, working with the horses, tending her garden, teaching her grandchildren to read, and welcoming the arrival of great-grandchildren. She was no longer the invisible girl who had believed herself worthless. She was a matriarch, strong and wise and deeply loved. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and look up at the stars, and she would talk to Xavier as if he was still beside her. She would tell him about their family, about the ranch, about all the ways their legacy lived on. And she could almost feel his presence, warm and comforting, telling her that he loved her still. When Sophia was 73 years old, she passed away quietly in her sleep, surrounded by family. Her children and grandchildren mourned her deeply, but also celebrated the incredible life she had lived. They spoke of her courage and kindness, her strength and wisdom, and most of all, they spoke of the great love she had shared with Xavier. Sophia and Xavier were buried side by side in the Independence Cemetery, under an oak tree overlooking the land they had loved. Their headstones bore simple inscriptions, but their family knew the truth. These were two people who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had built a life of meaning and purpose and deep, abiding love. Samuel stood at his parents' graves on a warm summer afternoon, years after they had both passed. His own children and grandchildren stood with him, a testament to the legacy Sophia and Xavier had created. He thought about his mother, who had been so quiet and invisible when she was young, and his father, who had seen her true worth when no one else did. "They really loved each other," his daughter said softly, reading the headstones. "They did," Samuel agreed. "More than most people ever get to love or be loved. My father used to say that my mother was his star, the light that guided him home. And my mother always said that my father made her visible, made her real. Together, they were complete." He placed flowers on both graves and stood for a moment in silence, remembering. Then he gathered his family and headed back to the ranch, to the house his father had built with his own hands, to the land that had sustained them for generations. The sun set over Independence, Missouri, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The ranch that Xavier and Sophia had built together thrived under their descendants' care. The horses ran free in the pastures, the house stood strong and welcoming, and the love that had created it all lived on in the hearts of every person who had been touched by their story. Sophia had thought she would always be invisible, just another forgotten soul passing through the world unmarked and unmourned. But Xavier had looked at her like she was the only star in the sky, and in doing so, he had changed both their lives forever. He had given her love and purpose and belonging, and she had given him the same in return. Their love story became part of the fabric of Independence, a tale passed down through generations as an example of how powerful it can be when someone truly sees another person, when they look past the surface to recognize the treasure beneath. It was a reminder that everyone matters, that everyone has value, that no one is truly invisible if we only take the time to look. And on clear nights, when the stars filled the Missouri sky like diamonds scattered across velvet, the people of Independence would sometimes think of Xavier and Sophia Pierce. They would remember the cowboy who had the wisdom to recognize a treasure when he saw one, and the woman who had the courage to believe she was worth being seen. They would remember a love that had transformed two lonely people into something greater, something lasting, something beautiful. The legacy of Xavier and Sophia lived on long after they were gone, not just in their descendants, but in the example they set. Their story taught that love can heal old wounds, that kindness can change lives, that seeing and being seen are among the most precious gifts we can give or receive. Years turned into decades, and the world changed around independence. But the Pierce Ranch remained, a testament to the power of love and hard work and devotion. And though Xavier and Sophia had long since passed into memory, their story endured, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt invisible, for anyone who had ever doubted their own worth. Because they had proven that even in the rough and tumble world of the Wild West, even in a time and place where life was hard and survival uncertain, love could flourish. Not the easy, superficial attraction that burned bright and quick, but deep, lasting, transformative love. The kind of love that sees past walls and defenses to the vulnerable heart beneath. The kind of love that makes both people better, stronger, more complete. Sophia had been invisible for so long, hiding in the shadows, believing herself unworthy of notice or affection. But Xavier had possessed the rare gift of truly seeing people, of recognizing their intrinsic worth. When he looked at Sophia, he did not see a mousy hired hand in worn dresses. He saw intelligence and strength, resilience and grace. He saw a woman worth knowing, worth loving, worth building a life beside. And Sophia, for her part, had been brave enough to step into the light. It would have been so easy to reject Xavier's attention, to retreat back into her protective shell of invisibility. But she had chosen courage over fear, hope over despair. She had allowed herself to be seen, to be known, to be loved. And in doing so, she had discovered her own strength and value. Together, they had created something remarkable. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, though both were significant achievements. They had created a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. They had built a home where everyone was seen and valued. They had raised children who understood the importance of kindness and the power of really looking at the people around you. The Pierce family continued to thrive for generations, each one carrying forward the lessons Xavier and Sophia had taught. They understood that success was not measured in wealth or status, but in relationships and love. They knew that the most important thing you could do was truly see the people around you, recognize their worth, and treat them accordingly. And sometimes, on anniversaries or special occasions, the Pierce descendants would gather at the old family cemetery. They would stand by Xavier and Sophia's graves and tell their story again, making sure it was never forgotten. They would talk about how love had transformed two lonely people into something greater, how kindness had built a legacy that endured long after the original lovers had passed. The children would listen wide-eyed, imagining their great-great-grandparents as young people falling in love in the Wild West. The adults would smile and remember, thinking about their own loves and relationships, inspired by the example set so many years ago. As the sun set on those gatherings, painting the Missouri sky in shades of gold and crimson and violet, someone would always look up at the emerging stars and remember Xavier's words, "You are the only star in my sky." And they would understand that this was not just a story about two people who fell in love. It was a story about the transformative power of being truly seen, truly known, truly loved. It was a story about a woman who thought she would always be invisible, and a cowboy who looked at her like she was the only star. It was a story about how that single act of seeing, of recognizing worth where others saw nothing, had changed everything. Not just for them, but for all the people they touched, all the lives they influenced, all the generations that came after. And the story lived on, as the best stories do, passed down through the years as a reminder that love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. Love is about choosing to see someone, really see them, and deciding they are worth your time and attention and devotion. Love is about being brave enough to step into the light and let yourself be seen in return. Sophia had been invisible, but she had never been worthless. Xavier had understood that from the very beginning, and he had dedicated his life to showing her the truth. And in the end, they had both won. They had found the love that most people only dream about, and they had built a life that mattered, a legacy that endured. The stars came out over Independence, Missouri, as they did every night, countless points of light in the vast darkness. But to the Pierce family, two stars always seemed to shine a little brighter than the others, side by side, eternal and unchanging. Xavier and Sophia, forever together, forever remembered, forever loved. Their story was complete, their lives well lived, their love immortal. They had started as two lonely people in a harsh world, invisible and overlooked. But they had found each other against all odds, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting. They had proven that even the most invisible person can become the brightest star, given the right person to see them. And that truth, more than anything else, was the real legacy of Xavier and Sophia Pierce. Not the ranch or the money or the descendants, though all of those mattered. The real legacy was the understanding that everyone has value. Everyone deserves to be seen. And love has the power to transform even the most invisible soul into something brilliant and unforgettable. The end of their earthly story was not really an ending at all, but a continuation. They lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They lived on in the ranch that still bore their name. They lived on in the stories told around dinner tables and at family gatherings. Most importantly, they lived on in the hearts of everyone who had learned from their example that love, real love, starts with the simple act of truly seeing another person. Sophia had thought she would always be invisible, but Xavier had looked at her like she was the only star in the sky. And that had made all the difference, not just for them, but for everyone who came after, everyone who heard their story and understood its deeper meaning. Love could heal, kindness could transform, being seen could change everything. And so the story of Sophia Winters and Xavier Pierce became more than just a tale of romance in the Wild West. It became a testament to the enduring power of love, the importance of seeing and valuing every person, and the incredible things that can happen when two lonely souls find each other and choose to build a life together. Their journey from invisibility to love, from loneliness to family, from despair to joy, was complete. And though they were gone, their legacy remained, a bright and shining example that would guide their descendants and inspire anyone who heard their story for generations to come. In the end, that was the greatest gift they could have given the world, proof that even in the hardest times and harshest places, love could flourish. That even the most invisible person could find someone who saw their worth. That even the loneliest soul could find belonging and purpose and deep, transformative love. Xavier and Sophia Pierce had found each other, loved each other, built a life together, and left behind a legacy that would never fade. Their story was a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is simply being seen by someone who truly understands your worth.